This is the China Hollywood Greenlight Podcast, episode number 30.
And rolling sound. Quiet. Here we go. Ready.
Speeding.
120, take 7. And action.
This is Karen McCann, the host of the China Hollywood Greenlight Podcast, a podcast about creating and distributing content for both Hollywood and China. If you like the show, please go to your podcast app, subscribe, and leave a rating. Your reviews will help boost the podcast and attract more listeners and guests. Any links mentioned in the podcast can be found in the show notes at chinahollywoodgreenlight.com/podcast, and look for this episode, which is number 30. Before I introduce today's guest, I'd like to start out with a motivational quote to encourage our listeners to continue on their path to achieving their own green light. And today's quote is from Theodore Roosevelt, who said, "In any situation, the best thing you can do is the right thing. The next best thing you can do is the wrong thing. The worst thing you can do is nothing." A quick update on what I'm working on. I finished my TV pilot, which is called There Can Be Only One. My plan is to shoot this in Taiwan. I'm now finishing another project. It's a procedural TV series that can be shot in Asia. It's sort of like NCIS, but instead of taking place in the world of naval crime, the show's engine will be crimes in the film and TV industry in Asia, which I thought was very unique. If you can think of a title for this series, please leave a comment. I also attracted a top Korean director to my action crime thriller to be shot in South Korea, so stuff is moving along. And as you may know, I launched a website called The China List. This is a platform to connect writers, talent reps, producers, and financiers in Hollywood and China. Producers can join for free and can find both English-speaking and Chinese-speaking writers, as well as scripts that are aimed at the world's two biggest markets, the U.S. and China. Writers can get in on a free trial, post your bio, and find either a representative or a producer. You can sign up to the China List at www.chnlist.com. We also plan to launch on the China List a writing gigs page. This is where producers can post a gig either for a writer or a script that meets their tailor-made specifications. Keep an eye on the site for our launch. And now for the main segment. Today's guest is Jesse Weiner. Jesse is a co-managing partner at YK Law. His main areas of practice include corporate intellectual property, blockchain, and entertainment. He's brokered and helped structure international joint ventures and strategic partnerships, including the Slate financing deal valued at $1.5 billion between Hunan TV and broadcast intermediary company and Lionsgate, and the recent purchase by a Chinese company of the XXX motion picture franchise from Revolution Studios and starring Vin Diesel. He's represented financial institutions, mezzanine investors, production companies, distributors, content creators, high net worth individuals, funds, and other individuals and others involved in various aspects of the production, financing, and distribution of film, television, and digital content, including having represented China's top directors, Zhang Yimou and Jiang Wen, and Ninghao's production company, Dirty Monkey, for the director's last major project, Crazy Alien, and Thai China action singer star, Mike Angelo. Well, Jesse, thank you for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much. That sounds like a very important person. Who's that?
That's only a part of what you've done. Well, I told the audience a little bit, I gave them a brief overview. So why don't you take a minute and tell us a little bit about yourself personally?
Well, of course, I think you've said a lot. Thank you so much. I'm really glad to be you, Karen. It's an honor, really. But yeah, besides that, really, I'm just at this point, as you mentioned, a co-managing partner of a relatively new firm. It's called YK Law. And as we'll get into in a moment, I spent quite a bit of time in China, and this firm is essentially an affiliation with China's largest law firm, Yinke Law Firm, Yinke Lushi Shuo, where I worked for quite a few years before coming back to the U.S. a couple of years ago.
Well, that leads into my first question. Why did you want to enter the China market?
It's interesting. I'm not really sure I necessarily wanted to enter China. I wasn't really looking for China. In a certain sense, China actually found me.
Wow.
Yeah. And now I just continue to engage with China because I guess it's really just kind of what I know, or at least know to some degree, I should say. But I guess this question allows me to give a brief background of how I got to China to begin with, or as to why China.
Right.
I actually received a master's in music quite some time ago. I
Okay.
was actually a conductor, composer, and a close friend of mine and classmate, who is now actually the venerated, internationally acclaimed conductor Zhang Xian. She introduced me to her mentor at the Zhongyang Inuyue Xueyuan. That's the Central
Wow.
Conservatory in Beijing, where I then visited and I thought I would stay on as an assistant conductor just for a semester, but I ended up staying in Beijing for quite a year. Then came back. I always wanted to be a lawyer. In fact, though, at the end of the day, so I came back to Washington D.C. for law school. Stayed on for about a year and a half after law school in D.C. But thought not so interesting there. And I started thinking about China. I got in touch with friends in China. Said, "Oh yeah, you can join this certain firm. They're looking for someone who kind of knows something about intellectual property and copyright." And so that's when I went back to China, and that's how I then stayed in China for the next another 7 or 8 years before coming back to the U.S.
Wow. So, can you tell us? I know no 2 days are the same, but what are like things you do on a typical day? Well, no, there's no such thing as a typical day, but what? Tell us a couple main tasks you do.
Well, sure. First of all, of course, having listened to many of your podcasts, I know that you interview people far more interesting than myself. Describing my general lawyerly daily tasks will not be all that stimulating. Probably not even for the lawyers, I guess. But though I've been there, done that every damn day. But I'll try to keep the interest in general applicability as best I can. I mean, for generally speaking, I work for writers, directors, producers, financiers, a budding film festival. So in that arena, my bread and butter, I guess you'd say, is kind of working on rights agreements. So basically, options and purchase agreements to investigate the chain of title, but also all the agreements that go along with for production company, including investment agreements, investment and loan agreements, as well. Since I now also work based both in LA and New York, and with the time I spend in New York now, I do represent quite a few artists, like actually fine painters over and a gallery. Of course, wouldn't know these artists happen to be all Chinese, and the gallery owner is by a Chinese individual down in Soho, not Chow Wai Soho, like Soho. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. And then, so how do you like? If you have connections with producers, directors, film festivals, how would you suggest the listener find perhaps a Chinese partner or a Chinese producer?
All right. So again, I think I'll take this question a little bit differently. I mean, again, since your usual guests, I'm sure, right? These are active and successful producers in the U.S. China entertainment space, and I'm simply a lawyer. Again, thanks for having me on. I hope my hongbao to you was sufficient. So for me, relates it's how to find clients, right?
Right.
So it's probably similar though to producers and others, since of course, though, in a sense, I am looking for the movers and shakers in the industry,
right?
And in that regard, now of course, putting COVID aside, because that's
yes.
It's been such a terrible effect on all of us. But prior to that, essentially, going to a lot of the film festivals, I mean, mainly Beijing, Shanghai, Hong Kong, and even AFM, in California, where
really good.
Well, sure. I mean, there's a lot of Chinese folks and companies that are there, but even the events that surround that event as well. So, including, of course, something like the Chinese American Film Festival, just trying to meet as many people there as possible. Obviously, though, you want to meet those more valuable contacts, shall we say. It's also good to have something that they want as well. So that would usually come, I guess, if you're a producer, that would usually come in the form of having a good script and maybe true attachments, some kind of big producer, director, or actors that are associated with the project. For me, though, it's actually been more helpful, again, as a lawyer, to have some kind of a deal or two in hand. So, for instance, I'll get into that deal. You mentioned the Hunan deal. So, for instance, I was involved rather seriously with the slate financing deal between Hunan TV and Lionsgate. And this also is one of those amazing things about China, those amazing opportunities. So I was working at the time for Yinka Law Firm when my boss was essentially outside general counsel for Hunan TV. And this was during those heady days in 2012, 13, 14, when money was just flowing wildly out of China. And Lionsgate was looking for a financing partner.
Uh-huh.
And they came knocking on Hunan TV's door, and it fell into my boss's lap. Now it's just, 2 or 3 years in law school, but since it was a U.S. related matter, he said, "Hey, Jesse, why don't you handle this deal, which is valued at $1.5 billion?"
Wow.
And I was like, well, okay. I happen to see on the
Is that U.S. or Chinese?
literally on the Lionsgate side, the 4 or 5 names I researched is like 120 years of legal experience, and here's me like 2 or 3 years.
Oh, boy.
But in any event, about a year later, I go to my boss, I'm like, "Hey, this deal's going to close." He's like, "What?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's going to close." And so, and then we brought it from and it really did. So,
yeah.
And so it was nice to have that kind of deal. So for me, again, getting back to the question, to have those kind of things to go to talk to companies about, producers about. And so then following on that, let's say you mentioned also Ning Hao's Dirty Monkey company, or a friend of mine who I'd met probably I'm pretty sure at one of the film festivals. We stayed in touch. He became a head producer for Ning Hao's Dirty Monkey company, which allowed me to work on his last feature film so far, Crazy Alien, so Feng Kuang, Wai Xinran. So that's how that came about, and how other deals like that have come about, like working for Mac Long and doing contracts for Andy Garcia in that film, Max's film with a Jabwa Culture Development Company. So yeah, so that's how things have kind of gone on. So that's how it kind of goes on. You go to some of these events, meet people, continue to stay in touch, continue to go to the events, and it's kind of.
But last year you probably weren't able to travel, right?
Correct. I was in China just in previous November, but no, I've not traveled at all.
So now, do you are some of these festivals are now online? So is that an option, just to do it online and trying to meet people that way?
I've tried that. It hasn't actually worked so well.
Yeah, you have to be there in person.
It seems like it, yeah. And then the events and the parties, and it's all part of it. How do you do that online?
Exactly. Okay. Well, that's good. A good tip. Now that things are a little bit getting more normalized. Excuse me. Hopefully, these film festivals. Maybe in the third quarter, maybe people could start going to these festivals again and make these connections. But let me ask you this question. What obstacle did you encounter on a past project? How did you overcome it, and what did you learn?
Well, let's see. I mean, I don't want to be too self-serving here, even though, of course, as I said, my own IQ is very healthy, I know. But let me just raise an issue or two that I come across, I think, far too often, let's say, with respect to clients and friends. So number one, so a client, friends will say, I had this deal with a Chinese company, and I was to do this revision of a script and develop a whole character world, or whatever language you all producers speak. And now they aren't going to pay me. And I say, okay, no problem. Send me the contract. Well, you see, I got to know them really well, and they were so nice. We meant to have an agreement, but things happen so fast. Okay, so. First of all, it's funny. I bet there are some of my friends probably out there in the ether right now saying, "I can't believe Jesse's telling them my story." Relax, people. It's not your story necessarily. Actually, it actually is, but excuse me. Okay, anyway. So, look, the point here is, I understand how that situation comes to pass, but the answer, of course, is just like, don't do it. Do your best, like, not to do it. Talk to me, talk to someone, have some kind of agreement in place. However, on the flip side of that, it also has to be mentioned, and it has happened, in fact, where, let's say, another friend had called me to say, I was at this party last night, this really nice, look who you are, in Beijing. We were drinking, and it turns out the host was also a producer who wants to develop my script. So we were drinking, and we signed this agreement on the back of a napkin. I said, wait. You mean you actually, literally signed an agreement on a napkin? Yeah, I signed away the rights on a contingency, and I'm supposed to pay him for this development.
Oh no!
Whoa. Okay, so send me the napkin. It's clean, right? So look, Now, so on that particular matter, I sent him this other person this ridiculously threatening letter to that party
Okay,
host. It was a
good.
total bluff, but it worked. We never heard from him again. But look, people might say, like, I would never do that kind of thing. Well, two things I would say. One, are you sure? But two, putting aside the whole napkin thing, what is presented to me quite often are these slapdash agreements, that barely say anything or mean anything at all, or maybe the translation is off or such.
Oh,
So it's just people should have something in place that actually means something, or even if they have something in place, if there's a governing law, let's say, clause, this is an important point also I want to make at all, then it's often for the wrong venue or wrong jurisdiction. So, for instance, right, if yours is an Italian company, say, and you're contracting with a Chinese individual entity, and you choose Italian law and courts to govern the agreement, I would say, and then there's a problem. I would say, forget about it, right? Look, please, the agreement will not be worth the digital paper it's written on because there's no enforcement whatsoever. So it's both. You want to have, you don't want to go on and not have a contract. You want to have something, but also, if it's going to be something, it should be actually something substantial, and that would actually help you. So I guess there are those things I would say people should keep in mind.
so do you think it should be a contract based on Chinese law, based in China?
Actually, no. Thank you for drilling down on that. Generally speaking, yes. If you're dealing with a Chinese company, Chinese individual, well, especially if you're in China, if you're working in China, but even if not, because you're dealing with a Chinese entity, you're going to have great difficulty. I mean, first of all, if you sue a Chinese company, let's say in the U.S., court judgments are not respected in China.
Right.
Arbitration is, but still, even so, to get to do an arbitration in one country, it takes one period of time, and then it takes a lot of time to actually enforce judgment in China. And no doubt about it, with that arbitral judgment, the defendants in China will still try also to fight it in China court as well. They'll end up having fight twice essentially. So yeah, generally speaking, you want to have it in China, either China law, China venue, courts, or arbitration. That depends, but mainly the point being, want to be in China if it's a Chinese entity or Chinese individual.
So when you have a Chinese law firm, like for example yours in China, they would give the Westerner the contract in two languages: the Chinese Mandarin and then the client's language. I'm just, because you were saying earlier the translation wasn't very good. I wondered who does that.
Yes, right. So we would do generally bilingual. It depends. If the client wants the contract also to be in English, then it'll be in English or just Chinese. I mean, it kind of depends on what the client's needs and wants are. But surely it should be, if in China, it should definitely be in Chinese. Yes, with a Chinese part.
Well, of course, right. But if you've got a Western client, they're going to want to read the contract in English or whatever. They're okay. Got it. Okay, so that sounds like an obstacle that you could avoid if you're smart about it. So, well, I don't avoid, hopefully, but you got to be smart about it. But speaking of obstacles, that leads to my next question. If you could magically solve two current problems, what would they be?
Well, Karen, I should first ask you, I'm curious, how many times have your guests cited peace? Number one. Okay.
We don't get macro or global. We drill down.
We're just getting started here, Karen. Okay, so putting that one aside, seriously, I guess I'm not sure about magically solve an issue, but I guess I wouldn't mind talking about an issue I've seen over quite some years. I've been in, and again, that clients and friends will often ask about or start talking about the whole issue of copyright and protection of those rights in China. And I would say, as far as property or script goes, specifically on the script itself, but also, again, public sentiment and enforcement generally, in my view, China really has made quite great strides.
Good to hear that.
And I'll say, it's just interesting also as an example. In 2014, in fact, I was on the team that handled a landmark copyright plagiarism case between a producer and an author is that Chong Yao case. I'm sure we can put a link to it if you'd like.
Right. Yeah.
Chong Yao is this grandmotherly figure. Everyone in China knows her. I didn't, but everyone knows her, and she's written many stories. And this young upstart producer, guy named Yu Zheng, basically he plagiarized her work. This work, his was The Palace, The Lost Daughter, and her novel was Mei Hua Lao, The Plum Blossom Scar. And we won this case, actually. And it was nice to see, because actually, interestingly enough, I was looking at some Chinese media, and just late last month, in late December, in fact, that producer, the defendant, Yu Zheng, was invited onto some reality TV show, and something like 100 producers and screenwriters wrote an open letter saying that they're complaining that these kind of people who've committed plagiarism should not be invited onto these shows and publicized. So it's there, so people really see it, they care about it. It's definitely been a good thing over these years, I would say. But it's not just like a lot of people say, "Oh, what does copyright mean in China?" It means nothing. It doesn't. There's probably still a way to go. Still, even now, for sure. But there's been sincere, true, and great improvement over the last decade or more.
Is there a second issue that you would like to solve?
I told you, world peace.
Okay.
I don't know.
Well, I'm gonna jump down to. I'm gonna kind of throw in an extra question here, because you mentioned copyright. How does a foreigner copyright a script in China?
Well, that's a good question. I appreciate the question. Right, definitely something that people ask me a lot as well. But I think, well, first off, on the actual how to copyright, actually, you and I were talking, Karen, especially about how to actually get into that online, the China Copyright Protection Center. And it's funny because while I had not been on it for some time myself, and again, I came back to the U.S. a couple of years ago and now when people wanted to register something, I send them to my associates in Beijing who just kind of go online and do it. But while many things in China have changed, I'll tell you something. That website, amazingly enough,
that's.
I mean, I'm gonna date myself. I mean, look, I was in Beijing when there were 2 subway lines. Okay, a lot has changed and very, very quickly. Wow. But that website, nothing has happened because it's still in Chinese. Yes, you can click on the English side of things and it gives you some information, but you really can't apply. In Chinese, number one. Number two, you still need a Chinese telephone number, because even if you go on there, Karen, I think you might have noticed, you can actually plug in a U.S. or any other country's number. But when you go to, when you put the number in and you click on, send the verification code, it says cannot send a foreign number.
That's right.
Okay. So first we have these very silly just hurdles right at the outset.
Right.
But fine. It is actually if you have a Chinese person, a representative, a lawyer, and I would recommend probably a lawyer, just so you know that they're representing you and not going to do anything nefarious. Right, and I'm not saying these good listeners' friends would do that, but just it can. I've heard it happens. It definitely happens. Okay. So you want to get it in your name, and you can, no issue with that at all. It's only a few hundred kwai. Probably takes a couple of weeks to get the registration. So no problem there. The follow-up, though, I think is interesting, is the issue of a co-production, or when a foreigner wants to work with a Chinese company to produce a film. Now, what happens here is, and we're not going to go into the whole process of getting a script and production, but right off the bat, though, the Chinese co-producer and you have to have a Chinese producer who is going to register with the Film Bureau to get the approval to actually go forward for the project, the film license. What happens often, though, now all the Chinese producer really needs under the law is an authorization letter that the Chinese producer can actually use the script to go forward. But what does often happen, when clients often come to me, or so that they say, oh, well, the Chinese producer said they had to own the copyright. See,
Whoa, wow.
understand that it's really not the case. Now, it may be the case in your private dealings where if it is a true co-production, I guess it's possible that a Chinese party might want to actually own fully the copyright in some way, shape, or form. But generally speaking, you probably want to get your name solely as the copyright owner,
Right.
and then work with any other party to move forward on the project, because all they're going to need to actually get that the Sukojung, this film project license, is, excuse me, with an authorization letter that company can use the copyright for the purpose of registering the script with the Film Bureau.
So what you're saying is it might be a good idea for the writer, if it's like a Western writer, to go with a lawyer or just buy a Chinese mobile number on Skype or something, whatever, and register themselves, and they're the copyright owner. And then if they do a deal in China, they could give an authorization letter to the producer. They don't necessarily have to hand over the copyright. Now, obviously, it still depends on the deal, but one step ahead would be to register it yourself as a writer.
Yes, yes, exactly. One would also be advised to probably register first. In the U.S. too, and actually, China does respect USPTO copyright registrations in the U.S.
Good.
Yes, but since in Chinese court, at the end of the day,
yes,
in a Chinese court, they'll say, well, we want to see it in Chinese, and what you have, and another thing, to have documents to be used from quote unquote foreign documents used in a Chinese court of law, you need to get them notarized, like certified with the state consulate, and then they have to go to the Chinese consulate to be authorized. So it's far better. I mean, it's cheaper, faster, easier just to get the Chinese copyright. For sure.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's why one would do that. And as one other matter, some people do ask me, "Oh, what about like WGA copy? If you get a WGA, registration?" No, that's also just. Well, I've just already said a USPTO copyright. While it's respected in China, it's not practical. WGA, not even respected. So you don't even have a chance of a WGA being used in China for some. Yeah, indeed.
That is good to know. Now, you have all these connections in China. You deal with directors, with stars, with film festivals. What sort of film projects do you think China is looking for, or maybe even some of your clients are looking for, or what the Chinese studios are looking for right now? COVID aside.
Well, this, of course, there's two questions here. I guess first, what they're looking for and what projects, let's say, what I might be looking for with my clients and so forth. But I mean, as far as China, this actually is a very difficult question, obviously, especially with COVID. I mean, considering COVID, but also trying to imagine, well, what if not COVID? Because I was just reading again not too long ago, don't quote me on exactly the numbers here, but in 2019, foreign films accounted for something like high 38% of gross revenue in China. And 2020, it went down to something like 18%, maybe a real big cut. But now that's happened. That's been happening the last couple of years. So what did COVID do? Of course, also an aside too. Everyone should realize, finally, of course, because I was in China, there's a talk of, when is China's film market going to beat the U.S.? It was thought it would be 2015 and 16 and 17. Well, of course, it was 2020. Even though in 2020, China's box office dropped by almost 70%, but of course, U.S. even far more so.
Right. That's a tough apples to apples comparison during a pandemic.
For sure, yeah. Right. This gets to again the issue of what China's looking for right now. I can bring this back to kind of what I'm doing also, what I try to do, because I'll just let you know as well. So my firm it was Yinke, well, so not Yinke, so Yinke is the China firm. Why here, U.S. firm, YK Law. We do have an associated consulting company, and with that company, we do try to have a look at projects and try to find financing and partners, mostly in China, because that's where me and other folks who work with YK Consulting tend to have most of our experience. And so, for that, I'll also mention that oftentimes people will come to me and say, "Oh, I have this great idea, and I've written a little treatment on it. Go find me some Chinese money." It's like no, it doesn't really. I don't know. Maybe in the U.S. you might find some investors, I suppose, but Chinese companies, I mean, they're on basically the other side of the spectrum. It's like, show me the finished movie. Let me go sit down in a room, do the finished movie, and I'll pay something for it. It's like so. It's sort of so. But at least I will say this: if we have a full script, and a deck, a finance plan, and it's something that might be able to be exhibited in China. So nothing that would affect the normal kind of hot button issues that we're avoiding those. There might be a chance to get some financing, especially with a company that sees it might be able to distribute the project in China. So just as example, so now actually, so my YK consulting company, we actually Chinese friend, we're actually working with Alec Baldwin and his company. So he has like a full on script, a completed script. And what's great too is we have definite attachments. In fact, being because it's him himself, he's going to star. Right. And it also is not that should affect China, their morals and so forth. So it could be something that can work. So those are the kind of things I guess would be nice to work with. And if you don't mind, I wouldn't mind just maybe one more aside, probably the last of the evening. It's getting a little late, but I would guess the last one of the evening. But that's the the Ilaria Baldwin story, which to me is just ridiculous. The whole Spanish heritage.
Oh,
the whole Spanish heritage thing,
right? I just saw he got off Twitter. I didn't see the story, didn't read it.
Well, so she's been saying that she's actually from Boston, but she seemingly has had a Spanish accent. But here's the thing. This whole story to me is absolutely ridiculous. And I understand that there's maybe more than one example out there, but her detractors always harp on this cucumber issue. She forgot the word cucumber. Well, here, and it's this, okay, we'll get this to China somehow. Hold on. Because let me tell you something. If any of these people have spent any appreciable amount of time working in another language, in another country, and then come back to English, it's easy to forget. And in fact, when I came back a few years ago from China, I was in a Subway sandwich shop, and I remember distinctly. I was in a tight line. I ordered turkey on a whole wheat, and then some tomato and onion. And then for the next thing, I realized I wasn't able to pick it out, and I said to myself, "Oh my God, I don't know what that is." And so I kind of nonchalantly point to it. I'm like, "That." Almost knowingly, the guy behind the counter pauses. He's like, "What?"
Oh, no.
I'm like, "That? What? First one there back, man." You mean cucumber? Like, yes, I mean cucumber. More, please. Yeah, so I think this whole story though, this really speaks a bit to our narrow-mindedness, as a country. But we digress, Karen. We digress. I apologize.
Yeah, that was the Twitter story where Alec Baldwin's wife, he got off Twitter because detractors were saying something about his wife's heritage. Right? That's the story.
Kind of. I mean, she seems to have a Spanish accent at times, and in one clip, you seem to have forgotten the word cucumber.
Oh, okay.
But all I'm saying is, look, it's a silly story, and it actually happens. I mean, again, because I literally forgot the word. Cucumber. So.
Okay, so
we're back. We're back, Karen.
Okay.
Everybody, we're back.
All right. Good. All right.
Good.
Here's a trick question. What question did I not ask you that I should have?
I have no idea.
Okay, here's a strange question. We just had the U.S. election. We have a new administration. Do you think that going forward is going to have any influence on the U.S.-China entertainment market?
Well, I would sure hope so. It's a little hard to say. I mean, look, on the one hand, of course, it's been an incredibly challenging time and continues to be, with respect to COVID. But of course, when talking about U.S.-China political relations too, this really has a huge effect on many levels, right? On the business back and forth and general collaboration. We've seen a real pulling away these last several years. Thank goodness, though, and I'm not looking to present any of my political affiliation, but at least for these purposes, thank goodness we have a new administration that. My thinking is they're going to be far less likely to have some kind of knee-jerk, China is the enemy on every single action China takes kind of reaction. Right. So it would seem, and I'd hope, these next months and years we'll see a more nuanced and realistic approach, which should lead to a thawing of the relationship and greater business, which thereby would be created for you and for me, of course, too. Which that would be great. So.
Here's another question. What advice can you give those aspiring to tap into the Chinese market?
Well, for sure, I guess maybe this goes to kind of how one can help themselves. And I just think about maybe my drawbacks or something. When I first started, I first went to China, didn't speak a word of Chinese. I'm sure many of your guests, I'm sure I've said this one before, and everybody seems to know it, but I just need to re-stress. And because now, even, now that you have a lot of Chinese, right, who are here in the U.S. and sort of know both cultures, and even a lot of foreigners do actually speak pretty good Chinese. So, but to really get to know China and work there and try to get, because what do you want to do? If you're a project, you need to get people to love your project the way you do. Get them to believe you and have fun together and drink and eat and talk about the project. And it's really difficult if you're really just going to have someone next to you sort of translating it. It's important. It's important. I'm not saying it can't be done. I mean, a lot of people go there. There's people who in the China market, I guess, who have not, don't know Chinese. But if we're starting out now, I would say it's a really important thing to be able to do. That being said, too, though, even if you speak a little bit, make an effort, Chinese love that. So that's of course that's a great thing to do. So I wouldn't say just because you think you won't be fluent. But to this day, I don't think I'm not fluent, I think, at all. But I mean, I can get along. I can understand. Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. But so it is important. So there's that.
Okay. Well, in conclusion, would you like to share any social media details, or so the audience can keep track of your work or your company?
Well, sure. I mean, of course, I'd love to provide the website of the law firm, which is, I'm sure we can have it on maybe on the link as well. But
I will put that on the link.
YKLaw.us for sure. We have different articles and webinars too, of course. So yeah. So yeah, I just want to say also, thank you for everything you do, and good luck on all the projects you have in this company.
Thank you, Jesse, for coming on the show today.
It is absolutely my pleasure. It really has been a true pleasure. Thank you so much.
Okay, and we'll see you at the premiere.
Fabulous.
And now for my 3 key points and 3 takeaways. Key points. Number 1, beware of deals signed on the back of a napkin. You should talk to a lawyer. Slapdash agreements can and usually do backfire. And beware of your deal's agreement jurisdiction. If you're doing a deal in China, it's best to use a Chinese contract that is subject to Chinese law. Number 2, copyright your script in China. If you want to copyright your script yourself, you can do it online, but you need a Chinese phone number. You can buy a temporary Chinese number on Skype for just a few dollars. The China copyright website is ccopyright.com. The organization is called Copyright Protection Center of China, 中国版权保护中心. Remember, it's not automatic that a foreigner must hand over their copyright in order for a Chinese film producer to obtain the film license. You can give your Chinese producer an authorization letter to use your copyright to register your script with the Film Bureau. It all depends on the deal you make. Number 3, U.S. copyright may not be enough. Now, even though China recognizes the jurisdiction of the USPTO, United States Patent and Trademark Office, however, in a Chinese court, you will need a lot of foreign documents that must be notarized with your state, authorized by the Chinese consulate, and much more. It's cheaper just to get the Chinese copyright. Now, 3 takeaways. How to stack the deck to attract a Chinese producer. Jesse mentioned Chinese studios prefer finished films, which means the risk is all on you. However, if you haven't shot your film, you should have at least the following: A completed script, B, a pitch deck, C, a finance plan, and D, make sure your project can be exhibited in China. See my link to my blog, 4 Ways to Beat the Chinese Censors, below. 2, the new administration. Jesse says it's less likely the Biden administration will have the previous knee-jerk reaction to China, so there may be a more nuanced and realistic approach to China. This may lead to a thawing of relations, which means greater business for everyone. Number 3, learn some Chinese. Now, no one expects a Westerner to quickly master Mandarin, but even learning a few words or sentences will be greatly appreciated by your Chinese counterparts. Well, that's the show. Thank you for listening. To show your support, please go to your podcast app and leave a rating. These social media touches really do spread the word about the podcast. And writers, make sure you take advantage of our free trial on the China List. This is a membership website to connect writers, producers, talent reps, and financiers in Hollywood and China. Now, producers, talent reps, and financiers, you can find great material and writers before your competition by signing up to the China List. That's the show. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you at the premiere. Bye. 一会儿见.